Welcome to the Lift Every Voice podcast, where we explore books by contemplative writers of color. I'm Christine Valters Paintner.
And I'm Claudia Love Mair. We are joined each month by the author of our book club selection. Together, we explore how increasing our diversity of perspectives on contemplative practice can enrich our experience of the Christian mystical tradition.
We encourage you to join us by reading the book, listening to the conversations, and engaging with the reflection questions on our website at abbeyofthearts.com. Welcome, everyone, to our Lift Every Voice Book Club podcast. I'm Christine Valters Paintner, and I'm joined by Claudia Love Mair, my monthly conversation partner. And this month, we're delighted to have Leticia Ochoa Adams, who is the award-nominated author of this fabulous book called Our Lady of Hot Messes, which may be my favorite book title ever. Getting Real with God in Dive Bars and Confessionals. So anyway, Leticia is a woman who knows what it feels like to be burned out, destroyed, completely emptied, feel nothing but loss. After her son's death by suicide, she found her way back to hope while still honoring her grief, attending to the business of living on, and finding joy even in the midst of immense loss and ceaseless tragedy, both personal and global. Through pain, we can feel our way to a sacred space and honesty where God can meet us, and from there to a place of healing and compassion, both for ourselves and for the larger world. So that's some beautiful words about Leticia that I found on your website. So welcome, Leticia, and we're really delighted to talk about all of those things in this conversation today.
Thanks so much for having me.
So let's start off, since I've already mentioned, this book really was prompted by your son's death from suicide, and it set you on a whole journey of upending everything that you thought you knew about faith, which is usually what happens when our world completely unravels. And you learned things about who God is rather than who you thought God was or were taught God was. So tell us more about just this precipitating event and what the journey was that it set you on, and how this loss undid your faith and led you to a new one.
Yeah, I before I became Catholic, I converted to Catholicism in 2009. Well, I started RCIA, which the classes to become Catholic, in 2009. I guess my conversion didn't actually happen until 2010. And before that, I lived a crazy life where I grew up in rural Texas, and then when I was 14, I moved to Amarillo, which is one of the biggest cities in the Panhandle of Texas. And I moved it was a culture shock. So I went from rural Texas, where 99% of the kids in my class were white, and moved to Amarillo, Texas, went to high school in freshman year, where 90% of the students in my school were Black, and then Asian, and then Hispanic, and there was like 5 white people in my high school in Amarillo. And so it was completely different than what I had grown up in. And growing up in my small town, I took myself to the Baptist church in this small town. I loved going. Everyone was so nice. There was always food and snacks and games. And so I went every Sunday, every Wednesday from the age of 8 until I was 13. And then when I moved to Amarillo, I kind of lost that space. I didn't have a space to go on Sundays and Wednesdays. I didn't have a church that I could just hop on my bike and ride down to. But I started this new school that had so many different experiences than I had before. And I grew in friendships with people that taught me a whole new aspect of life. And while I didn't have the church aspect, I had the community aspect. You know, Black families will just welcome you in and take you in and be, you know, kind to you. Grandmas will teach you lessons. That, I mean, there's always someone to talk to, and I'm just a talker anyways. So that sense of community, of what it means to be honest, what it means to uh, conflict resolution is you tell someone what is wrong and they tell you how you can fix it, and you have a whole entire conversation about it. That just didn't happen where I grew up, and it didn't happen in my family. So this whole new way of being in community was different to me, and I loved it so much. I learned I was Mexican. I was 14 years old and thought I was a white girl, and was shocked to find out that I was not. So I learned about racism. I learned about the history of, I mean, a bunch of stuff that I learned growing up, but I didn't see it. It was history. It was history. And in Amarillo, it was present. It was present time. And it was really real. So that kind of changed my perspective. And then, you know, I, you know, was promiscuous, got pregnant as a teenager, had my oldest son, Anthony, and then moved to Houston, which was an even bigger city. I mean, Houston is ginormous, and I was 19, had no sense of safety or anything else. I was just kind of running around like a wild child. It's a miracle I survived. And met my first husband, got married, got divorced, blah, blah, blah. Then I ended up moving to Austin in 2007, getting back with my childhood sweetheart, and we moved to the suburbs, which I had never even freaking heard of. It was sidewalks, green lawns, trees. It was just another culture shock. And I became Catholic because I just assumed you live in the suburbs, you have a brick home, you have a blended family, you go to church. That's just what you do. But then I became a real know-it-all, self-righteous person who thought I knew all this stuff. And I really played into the idea that if I can make it, anyone else can make it. Real pull yourself up by your bootstraps type of mentality. So I was real cocky, real self-righteous, very sure of myself, very sure of, you know, hashtag blessed stuff. And then, you know, kind of difficulties in my marriage started happening with my second husband. And I just didn't really understand because I thought I was doing all the right things. I was praying all the right novenas. I was going to mass on Sundays. I was checking the box. I was pro-life. I was voting Republican. I mean, in my mind, it was like, quote unquote, all the right things. Like why am I having any difficulty? And I started therapy and started really dealing with a bunch of my childhood trauma. When Anthony died in March of 2017, that was kind of like the last, quote unquote, last straw for me, where it's like, I've done all these things. I've changed my life. I have become a devoted Catholic. I just had all this list of all the things that I had done right. So how dare God allow this thing to happen to me? That was probably like the day of and like a week after. That was my entire thought process, was how dare he, you know, allow my child to die. And then after that, the trauma reaction was to investigate what happened. Why Anthony? What happened? Where did I fail? What did I do wrong? And it just led me into this really unique space of trauma theology and um neuroscience, like how we're made, you know, and then social science, like the impact of generational trauma, the impact of what my great grandmothers went through as Indigenous women who never moved but had borders cross them constantly, you know. And my great grandmother, my paternal great grandmother, is the only other person in my family besides Anthony to commit suicide. Like, she died by suicide also. And her story is crazy. Like, my great grandfather won her in a poker tournament. You know, she was an Indigenous girl who ended up married to a man who won her on a poker tournament, had all these kids, devoutly Christian. And then one day she just, you know, took a bunch of pills and left a note. So all of that put together was like this space that I just didn't hear anyone talking about. Generational trauma, racism, theology, and just neuroscience, how we're made. So that led me to just completely undo the way I saw God as this man in a chair in the sky who was just like making everything happen, good things for these people, bad things for those people. And in my mind now, it's like this American version of God, you know, the idea that if you do good things, then God will bless you. That's really an American concept. That's not really how God works, you know? And so it just undid everything that I had ever known and created this relationship with God that is just different. Like, I don't go to mass because it's something good so that I get something good. I go to mass because that's this time set aside. It's like date night, you know, it's this time set aside to spend with God, not doing something to get something. It's not a to-do list. It's a date, you know, it's a time to spend with him. And so it just changed everything for me. And it had to happen because the way I saw it was I was putting my son in his hands, you know. My son's dead. I mean, that's just the reality of it. And the only person I know who can take care of him at this moment or look out for him or see him and talk to him is God. So you don't really trust anyone with your children unless you know them and love them. So that was my option, was to know and love God. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Leticia. It's a beautiful, well, I mean, part of what makes your book so powerful, of course, is your real honest wrestling with struggle, and then you're really calling into account, I think, what so many people who are eventually led to this kind of more deeper intimacy with the divine experience, you know, which is where, you know, this sense of, instead of the relationship with God being a transactional relationship where we do things to get things, we enter into it in this more spiritually mature space, hopefully, of that intimacy and that loving and that sense of mutuality. And yeah, you express that really beautifully in your book. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I just and I think, gosh, it makes me well, it makes me angry, honestly, but then it also just makes me so sad that rarely do I see Christians preaching that in public. Like, I see a lot of the rigidness, which, well, it's not attractive. First of all, like, you're not really convincing anyone, hey, you should follow Jesus, whenever it's like so rigid and filled with anger and shame. It makes me sad because I have, you know, I don't know. I've seen the things that God will do for you, and it doesn't mean that your life is not hard still, or that there's still not suffering. I actually wrote this to someone yesterday, where it's like, Jesus did not make the loss of Anthony better for me. That doesn't mean that my faith is not strong. It doesn't mean that I don't know that he is God and that he is, you know, everything that I believe him to be, but I still am broken that my son's gone, you know. He's not a magic wand. And when you can stand in that reality, I think that's when you, like you said, that's when you really do have this intimate relationship with God, where he isn't your fairy godmother. He is, I don't want to say just God, but God as he is, not this like magic wand waving guy who just makes everything better if you do the right things.
Leticia, you wrote, prayer works, get life insurance anyway. I lost a child too, and one of the hardest stages of grief was the anger, because, I like to think of myself as a warm and fuzzy person, full of love, and anger was really hard for me. Walk us through that angry part of grief and that moment in confession that began to lift you.
Yeah, I like a few days after, so Anthony died on a Wednesday. On a Friday, I went to 6:30 mass, 6:30 in the morning mass, just because I couldn't sleep, and it was the only place I could think of to go. So that's where I went. After mass, I went straight to, the tabernacle, and I kneeled there. And some lady saw me and later mentioned to me, like, I just thought you were such a woman of faith because you went straight to God in the tabernacle and were praying. And I was like, if you could only have heard what I was saying, so it's so awful that I've never even repeated it out loud, because it's just, I was so mad, and then people would say things like, well, Mary understands your loss. And it's like, no, she doesn't. Her son was God. He rose from the dead. She got to see the, happy ending 3 days later. Like, it's been 6 years, almost 7 for me. And I am still kind of like in a question mark stage. So no, it's not the same. While I understand that Mary does empathize and sympathize, she would be the first one to say it's not the same. She was also sinless, so she didn't go around cussing random baristas out because they got their coffee wrong, because they were having a bad grief day. So there's also that. And so the anger for me was very comfortable, because that's how I dealt with most of my trauma without even knowing it. It was anger, mostly at myself, and then it became outward later on in my like 20s. But the thing that was so hard for me was when I would see friends that knew Anthony and their kids were the same age as Anthony, and our kids played together and our kids spent the night, and these other kids were getting married or having babies or just the normal life things, and I would just be filled with rage. And that was something that was different for me, because I've always been a good friend, a loyal friend, a friend that is happy for you and wants to be there. And then to be purposely not invited to these celebrations out of what they sensed was kindness, but to me was just more icing on the cake of like, this really sucks. This is really awful. But then I learned to see, like, I have things too. Like, I know other parents who lost their children to suicide and they don't have grandkids. I have Anthony's children. So it's just kind of like this really weird dice throw, and then no matter what my circumstances are, someone's circumstances are different than mine, and they can look at my circumstances and say, well, she has this, I wish I had that. And I could do that to someone else. But where does that really get us? Whereas I could just be thankful for what I have. I can be thankful for my grandkids. I can be thankful for the memories that I have of Anthony. I can be thankful that I get to share him with other people on podcasts like this, or anywhere anyone allows me to, I'll do it, So that's where I try to start focus on. It's not easy for me. Anger is easier. But that's what I try to focus on, and not in some not in some, #blessed kind of way, but just holding on to the good, as a lifesaver.
And the confession that you went to.
Yeah. And then that, so Father Jonathan has been with me since my conversion. So he heard my first confession. He's heard almost all of my really deep confessions anyway. And he knows me, like he knew me, he knew Anthony, he baptized Anthony, he blessed Anthony's body after we found him. So when I sat down, I didn't have this need to explain a lot. So I could just be honest and confess my anger and confess how much I thought God sucked at his job, and not just confess it, but say it. And I like like Father was like a telephone that I could just tell God through him, like, these are my problems. And to see Father Jonathan um to cry with me, he cried with me and said, I love Anthony too. That was a loss for me. And him saying it as Father Jonathan, who knew Anthony, but also saying it in confession so that he was also a telephone for God back to me, really made me realize that, yeah, God did see what happened that day and how awful, you know, uh, to have witnessed it and grieved it, you know. Um, so that really lifted a lot of that anger for me, you know.
Thank you. And I'm sorry for your loss.
I'm sorry for yours too.
Well, I know Claudia and I both underlined this phrase of yours, Jesus is not fluffy. Because I just loved it when I read that, because I have a lot of resistance to faith that just focuses on light and love. And
Yeah.
because there's a lot of struggle, there's a lot of suffering. How do we make that real? How do we hold that intention with the divine presence? So tell us more about the Jesus that you encountered through your experience, who led you to make this statement about
Oh my gosh.
him.
I mean, like when you read the Gospels, he's a snarky little man. Like he's just snarky, He's a smart ass. Like I love the wedding of Cana where Mary's like, we're running out of wine, and he's like, what's it to me? Like, and he's God. So and he's love itself. So he's not being mean. He's just like, haha, like, and then he says things like, he calls us sheep and sheep are dumb. Like he's just snarky and funny. That's why I think comedy is such a source of God, because it's like he is funny. I think there's a joke even in the fact that God became man as a man. Like I don't know what that is, but I know it's in there. There's a punchline in there somewhere. But yeah, but he's also stern, yeah, I ranted and raved and said a bunch of awful things in my prayer after Anthony died, but then at some point, the sternness came where it's like, why do you think you're special? Like, mothers have been losing their sons since the beginning of time, literally. Eve, so what sets you apart? What do you, why should you be different? Like it does, and that kind of sternness really gets me to realize that the point of life is not to avoid suffering. The point of life is to survive it and help others that are going through it. And that is an act of holiness as well. I think sometimes people think like, I need to be on Instagram, I need to have 1.5 million followers listen to my wise captions about Jesus. And it's like, maybe this is wild, this is crazy, maybe you're just supposed to help your neighbor or your kid or your spouse or your best friend go through their worst time, because you've experienced it, because that's just life. It's not good or bad. It's just life,
Yeah, I love the image that Henry Nouwen has about the wounded healer, and how, ultimately it's our places of woundings that lead us to whatever we're called to, which may just be sitting with a friend who's also gone through the loss, and that act of kindness and care and presence when everybody else wants to just rush that person along can really make the difference for
Yeah,
them
and I
to
mean,
feel seen.
the resurrected Christ still had the scars of his wounds. It's not like he came back without them.
Yeah.
So there's something to be said about sitting with people with the scars of your wounds, and just sitting with them, not trying to fix it, not trying to make it better, not saying, oh, I know how you feel because this and this and that happened to me, but just sitting in that space,
Yeah.
Now, Leticia, you have trauma from there's a generational trauma from your own childhood, trauma from being a young adult, and getting pregnant so young, trauma even probably from marriage that failed. And you went to therapy, and that takes a lot of courage, especially coming from a church background where a lot of people, are resistant to therapy. They pray, pray problems away. So tell us more about your experience with therapy and what advice you would give to someone who has trauma and they're on the fence or resistant to it.
I'll start with my advice. My advice is always, always, always find a therapist. Find a therapist. If you don't, vibe with your first therapist, fire them, go to the second one. You will find someone, and the only therapist that's going to be offended if you don't mesh, or like if you don't really work with them, is a bad therapist. So that's fine. They can be offended, so that's my advice. And then my road to therapy is like all my roads to anything good, is that God tricks me. He tricks me every single time. I always feel like when I read, be fishers of men, it makes me laugh because that's how God treats me, as like I'm a fish and he baits me with something and then I'm hooked and I'm like, dang it, once again got me. So with therapy, I was having a really hard time and everything was really chaotic around me. Now, decade, I don't know, about a decade later, I can say that I know when stuff is chaos around me, that it's a clear sign to stop and reprioritize what I'm doing. A lot of people think that the devil is, so sensational, and he's really not. He's really boring and predictable. And anytime there's chaos in my life of any sort, it's time to stop, reprioritize, look at what I'm doing, and not go to extreme measures to try to deal with this spiritual warfare. It's just simple things. And I learned, because when all this chaos was happening in my life at this time, I made a list on my whiteboard of things I needed, and this is how arrogant I am, things I needed God to give me. In order for my life to be good, you, the maker of the universe, need to give me these 5 things, and he always entertains me. But one of them was like an exorcist, because I was sure that, my house was possessed, of course. And then 2 was a spiritual director, 3 a therapist. No, therapist was like the last thing I asked for. And so one of the problems was my marriage. So I found a Catholic therapist that went to my parish, and it's a whole entire group of Catholic therapists. And so I just picked one, and I emailed her and I said, me and my husband need to come see you because he's doing X, Y, and Z. He's the problem, blah, 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 blah. And so we go to the first meeting. My husband, of course, is not into it whatsoever. And so she's like, you know, I don't really feel like Stacy wants to be in therapy, and that's okay. Maybe we could do some one-on-one sessions and see how I can support you. And so I was like, okay, fine, sure. You know, yeah, you help support me fix him. Yeah, that's what I need. I need you to tell me the ways that I can fix this man, because he's obviously the problem. And probably about 3 months into therapy, we were having a conversation, and it dawned on me, and I was like, wait a minute. So maybe he's not the problem. Like maybe I'm the problem. And she's like, well, I'm not really saying that, but you know, you have your own traumas and your own trauma reactions and your own, she was telling me about triggers and how, like, when something triggers you, your brain just goes think, 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 you know, lights up. And I'm like, I know exactly what she's talking about. That happens to me. And so then it just became, I don't want to say addictive, but it just became the peace that I felt after therapy became addictive. And I wanted more and more and more and more of it. And the more I talked, the more, yeah, necessary. Yeah. Yeah. It was like cleaning house, you know, how when you first start cleaning house and everything's just a mess, and then you start getting it, you know, slowly organized. And then by the end of it, you're like, this is it. And you're sitting on the couch with a cup of coffee, and you're just like, yes, this is what I was looking for. That's the feeling I felt after therapy. And so I just kept going, you know, and it is so, I used to be, this is a great example. So if Stace did not come home from work right at when he was done, I mean, he was done from work, he was straight home, spent the whole evening with me. If he didn't do that every single day, I felt rejected, abandoned, and that would lead me to be angry, spiteful, texting, calling, acting like a psycho, you know, texting, calling, going through his phone when he would get home, just constant, you know, like just anxiety and abandonment. Yesterday, he left here. He went to go do some work meeting, and that work meeting ended up at the bar down the road from our house. And he came home at 9 o'clock. I didn't text or call him once. I didn't worry about where he was, didn't worry about what he was doing. I didn't have a bunch of intrusive thoughts. It was just life. And I would never have been able to do that without therapy, processing. Why did I feel abandoned? Why did I feel rejected? You know? So yeah, that's what's addicting. It's just being able to live my life without assuming the worst of everyone around me, you know?
And the thing is, everything you just described is a trauma response. And you don't know it's a trauma response until you unpack that with a professional.
Yeah, with a professional. Exactly. Not a TikTok video or
or a book.
Or a book. I think all of those things are like tilling a garden, right? It's like getting through the hard soil, but then you have to go with a licensed professional to unpack all of it for your safety, more than anything. And I also feel like we don't know it's trauma reactions, and we don't know that other people's trauma reactions are adding to our trauma reactions. And then you end up in a group full of trauma reacting people who are like, oh yeah, I bet he's blah. You need to do this, and you need to go through his phone, and da, 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 and then jump in a car with you to go look and find this guy. You know what I mean? Like that's trauma bonding, in case anyone needs to know. But like, but like all of that, all of those dramatics, and all of that time and energy, and I don't know. It seems funny and it seems fun, and it is funny to talk about some of the stories now with my friends, but this is much better to me. You know, this is much better, much calmer, much easier. easier, just plain easier.
Thank you.
Yeah, life should have some ease to it, especially with all the things we struggle with. Well, I mentioned how much I love the title of your book, Our Lady of Hot Messes. And you write on page 55, our choices are our power, not our messes. Yes, Our Lady stands with us in the mess, but the whole time she's praying for us to start making choices that lead to cleaning them up, which I think you've just been demonstrating how you've been doing that, particularly through therapy. Well, tell us a little bit about your relationship to Mary and how she empowered some of the choices you made in your life.
Like I said, I pretty much raised myself Baptist. So at first, me and Mary were kind of at odds, or so I thought. But my mother was, my mom was a cradle Catholic. So during my teen years, when I was really acting out, she bought this stand that had these little candle things in Mary, and she would light candles for me all the time. And so I'm sure that those prayers were what led me to go back to Catholicism and led me to the places that I ended up. So me and Mary are good now, really. But I think what really always gets me is the power of Mary's yes, right? She had full right to say no too. But she said yes, and that changed everything. That changed everything for us, that changed everything for the world, that changed things for God. He became man when she said yes. So her yes changed things for God too. It made God flesh, like that's crazy. So I think of the power of that yes, and that's what it's kind of a different mentality than pull yourself up by the bootstraps, because you can't do it yourself. It's the power of what happens when you say yes to God, not just your own power, like your own, I'm going to choose to do this and I'm going to choose to do that. It's the choices that we make when we say yes to God. That's where the power really is in changing the trajectory. I was talking about generational trauma. My grandparents were migrant workers. My grandfather worked every day of his life on someone else's land, every day for 25 cents a week, and now I live on 10 acres of my own land that I work, that I have my own cows, my own horses. Like my uncle dreamt of being able to own his own horse. And I'm living those dreams, and my grandchildren are going to inherit this land and this mini ranch. And I did that in my one generation, but I didn't do it by myself. I did it with the tenacity and resilience of my grandmothers, the wisdom of my grandfather, and with the help of my husband and everyone, and saying yes to God. But I mean, it was crazy. We picked this track without even looking at it. Like I didn't even know where I was going to live when we bought this land. And that's because I knew God was like, here you go. And it's one of those yeses that you're like, I don't know, but okay. Sure, why not? And that's the power, is when you say yes to God and with God.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really powerful story. I love that. And I love that image of you living out the dreams of your grandparents. What a blessing that is. Yeah. Beautiful.
I don't think of myself as a short form writer because I never think to submit things to magazines and stuff. But I will write a 1,200 word Facebook post. Never think about it. And my children will text each other, tell mom to take that down. Oh my God. Vulnerable, very transparent writing, I found, builds community. And
Yes.
that's the kind of writing that I found in your book. It doesn't make it easy, though. So tell us about the power of very transparent, kind of saran wrap, vulnerable writing.
I I don't have a filter. So I don't know how to sugarcoat things or how to say things in a way that isn't truth. I mean, I've been telling stories since I was a kid. That's not to say that I don't add something to make it funny, or I don't, like, you know, stitch two pieces of truth together because it's funnier that way. Which is the part of storytelling that makes it, makes it readable or entertainable or whatever you want to say, right? But the vulnerability is just natural to me because I really dislike not being able to see. Okay, so you're helping me with marriage prep, and you're a nice couple. You've been together for 50 years. Great, wonderful, I love it. I can see the longevity in it. But what was your hardest point in your marriage, and how did you get through that? And maybe you don't tell that to engaged couples, but at some point, every marriage is going to hit that spot, and there's no one around, because it's like, okay, so my husband just got arrested. What do I do? And good Catholic couples are like, like, or, oh no, we've never gone through that. And I know that's the natural instinct, even though we're all going through our own crap, and when we go through it by ourselves, we're isolated, which is the perfect place for the devil to creep on in, is when you're isolated. But when you're in community, which is what we're built for, we're made for community, to be loved, to be known, and to know and love others. We can share those moments and not feel alone, have some advice, get some insight, with the wisdom of discernment. We can figure out our own path, right? And not everyone's called to share in a book out there in the world, but we are called to share in our community with the people closest to us, to build those relationships with people. I saw someone the other day say, the village, we're no longer born into the village that helps us. We have to hire the village. And I thought, that's so awful, No, you still build a village of people that you trust, and you trust their wisdom, you trust their judgment, and you trust their advice, and then you trust yourself to discern through what everyone says to find your own way. So to me, it's just easier for me to write it in a book, and then maybe people will be like, oh, okay, so it's not the worst thing, and I can talk to my friend or my pastor or whatever the case might be, and I don't have a problem doing that. With my kids and my husband, it gets tricky sometimes, so I have to be really careful to tell my story and stand in that. So when they're like, Mom, blah blah blah, or my husband says, that hurt my feelings that you said that, I can be like, that's my part of the story. If you want to tell your side of the story, tell it. But I have the right to my story.
Right. And that really is a tricky part. I've always tried to keep the focus on myself when I'm telling personal stories, but sometimes that other person comes in, and usually I will let them know that I wrote this thing, or I'll try to, buffer them as much as I can, or write about them with as much kindness as I can, and still tell my story. But it's tricky. It really is.
It is tricky. And I think that it's been a work in progress to let everyone know, like especially as a survivor of child sex abuse, it's taken me a lot of therapy and a lot of healing to get to a place where I know my story and no one has the right to tell me that it isn't, you know? And so even if the perspective is different, even if your perspective is different, that's totally fine. I'm not saying this is the truth and the only truth. This is just my perspective. And I get to own that because it's mine. It's my perspective. And I fought for it, you know? And with time that's worked pretty good.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much, Leticia. This has been a really rich conversation, and we're really grateful to you for taking time to share your wisdom, wrought from struggle, and the vulnerability, and all of that is such a gift. So we encourage everyone to buy a copy of Our Lady of Hot Messes and read it through with an open heart, and you will definitely be touched by many of the stories, and you will laugh out loud many times. You have some great sense of humor, which I didn't get to really talk about, but we do need to wrap things up. But one of my favorite lines was, my feelings on manifestation are complicated because I love Oprah and she advocates for manifestation. And to be really honest, I find it easier to disagree with God than with Oprah. I am only human. So anyway, that kind of humor I love. And your book has a lot of that as well. So it's a beautiful balance and mix of the heart-wrenching, tragedy that you endured, but also finding the humor and the love and the joy in the community through it. So thank you so much. And many blessings.
Thank you. Thank you so much for such a great conversation.